Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 46 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Vegas Golden Knights, in which the Sharks have lost 5-2. Now 7 losses in a row, their longest losing streak of the season, and 7 losses on the year against this Vegas Golden Knights team. They are 0-7 against them in this 8-game series. They'll have one last chance to beat the Golden Knights this season when we get to the final day of the regular season, or at least the final game of the regular season for the Sharks. And this one started off, as many of the other previous games during this loss streak have started off, the Sharks scored the first goal, and it came within the first few minutes. This stat of a team scoring the first goal being able to win games is taking a massive hit from all of these Sharks games where they're scoring the first goal and yet still losing. Timo Meier puts the Sharks up 1-0. Just a few minutes later, though, it is Marchessault for the Golden Knights who ties it up at 1, and that's the score at the end of 20 minutes. Come second period, the Sharks would once again get the lead. They'd get Tomas Hertl on the board to make it 2-1, but the Golden Knights would soon after tie it up with a Mark Stone goal, and then eventually Tuck would make it 3-2, and that would be the score at the end of 40 minutes, the first lead for the Golden Knights of the game, and it would be a lead that would stand in the third period. Marchessault would score again to make it 4-2, and that would pretty much put it away. Eventually, Janmark would add an empty netter, and a 5-2 loss would be what the Sharks would be staring down at the end of it. First thing to talk about, I guess, would be playoffs, and no matter how hard the Sharks are trying to get out of this playoff race, this race until this fourth spot in the West Division has become the most pathetic playoff race in the history of the NHL, as it seems as though no team actually wants to claim it. The Blues have lost their last couple, and they haven't played in a long time. They have had multiple days off, which is kind of strange in such a condensed season. The Arizona Coyotes continue to lose, as they lost here tonight against the Minnesota Wild, and the Sharks, of course, are on a 7-game losing streak. And so while a 7-game losing streak would normally mean you're completely out of the playoff race, especially since the Sharks weren't necessarily in second place and have dropped out of the playoffs because of 7 losses. They were never even in a playoff spot to begin with, and yet they still only find themselves 4 points out of 4th place. So if something crazy could happen, by some miracle the Sharks turn things around, it is still a very, very, a possible situation that could happen, especially with their 4 remaining games on the year against the Arizona Coyotes. However, with 7 losses in a row, things aren't necessarily looking all too hot. Next, we'll be talking about Koshinash as he starts the game here tonight, which was somewhat surprising in my opinion. Martin Jones played pretty well in the previous game against the Golden Knights, only letting in a couple of goals, bringing the Sharks into the shootout before losing there, and that was 2 goals on 40 shots, so he looked quite solid. The Sharks are not having a back-to-back here. The Sharks back-to-back that was going to be this weekend was actually delayed, so the Sharks only have a game on Saturday there, and so it seemed as though Jones definitely could have gotten the start here tonight, but instead they go with Koshinash, and he was, I guess, okay. His first period was quite solid, probably the main reason why the Sharks actually managed to get out of the first period tied at 1. But then you also look at this 4th goal from Marchessault. That was a pretty weak one, and that was one that was really killer for the San Jose Sharks, especially since prior to that goal, just a few moments earlier, the Sharks came so close to getting the game-tying goal at 3 from, I believe, Ryan Donato, who just barely missed the net. And so giving up that second Marchessault goal was pretty bad, and it was not a great goal from Koshinash. So it seems as though he seems to have similar problems to Martin Jones. I don't know if it's a coincidence or it's just to be expected with the San Jose Sharks defensive core as a whole, but it seems as though Koshinash has kind of similar issues to what Martin Jones has, where he'll make some very nice saves in a specific game, but there will also just be that 1 or 2 goals that will kind of stick out and say, well, that was a pretty weak one. He probably should have made that save, and the second Marchessault goal was definitely that tonight. When it comes to, did he look better than he did in his first start of the year, which was against the Anaheim Ducks a few games ago? I wouldn't say he necessarily looked better. He probably looked pretty similar. He still seems to be a goaltender that kind of gives me heart attacks time and time again. He plays very aggressively. He makes himself quite small in the net, so while he can make some nice saves, there are definitely some skipped beats when the puck comes towards the goal. So we'll see how many games he gets down the stretch here and how many games Jones will get. It'll definitely depend if the Sharks can actually get in the win column at some point and maybe make that push for the playoffs that for somehow is still possible. Next, I'll be talking about Shellman. So he was a player who was very impressive, in my opinion, in the 1920 season, made up a very strong fourth line for the San Jose Sharks, along with the likes of Stefan Nason, the player who the Sharks actually re-signed this season because of how strong that fourth line was, though that didn't pan out. And Shellman also did not really pan out this year. He played a couple of games near the start of the season, but nothing really stuck. He was pretty invisible in those games, and then he was sent down to the AHL for a very, very long period of time, only recently coming back up and playing a few games here, and he's been significantly better as of late. He had a goal the other game. He set up the first goal of this game, Timo Meyer's, here tonight, and he's just been rather impressive, which has been nice to see because he was a player, as I said, I really enjoyed last season. He seemed to have a lot of the makings of a pretty solid fourth liner, and so to see those things re-emerge here is nice. Hopefully he can actually find some consistency in that, because as I've pointed out, at least before the Sharks' massive losing streak, they were getting some decent looks from their first, second, and third lines, but it was really their fourth line that was kind of shaky, in my opinion. So it would be nice to see them reinforce that. Now, of course, with these 7 losses in a row, it seems as though all 4 of their lines are quite shaky, but if they could ever get back on track, that would be something nice for Shellman to be able to center that strong fourth line for the Sharks. And finally, let's talk about puck watching, the phenomenon known as puck watching, something that if you are familiar with the San Jose Sharks, you must be familiar with this concept because the Sharks are masters of this. Now, basically what it is that as a defending player, if you are puck watching, you're essentially just, well, it kind of is in the name, you're watching the player who is holding the puck. You're not anticipating the play about who he can pass to or where he could, where he could look to make a play towards. You're mostly just sort of hoping that he's going to make a mistake, that player, and give the puck away to you. Now, there are 2 situations where this type of puck watching occurs. And the first one isn't necessarily a sign of bad things for your team. It's something that will happen to every team once in a while, which is when your defending players are on an extremely long shift, 90 seconds, maybe 2 full minutes, and so they don't really have the energy to try and anticipate and skate around the ice following their players, and so they sort of just shadowing the puck holder and hoping that that player will make a mistake, they can get the puck and they can clear it out. It's not the end of the world when that happens, even if it's bad, even if it's a bad thing for your team, so that's not the huge problem. The huge problem is that when instead of it being done because you're tired, it's being done because you are lazy, which is something that the Sharks seem to do a lot, and it's something that absolutely happened here tonight on both the first goal and the third goal of this game. On the first Marchessault one, it is Tomas Hertl who is the perpetrator of this crime, where he decides to randomly float towards the wall where Erik Karlsson's covering his man and just completely leaves open the slot for Marchessault, who receives this pass very easily and is able to make a nice move around Koshinash and put the puck in the back of the net that would tie it at 1. I don't know what Hertl is thinking in this situation. It seems to be that he's just puck watching and kind of hoping that by reinforcing Erik Karlsson, they'll be able to randomly take the puck away, that the puck will just gravitate towards them. But instead, the Golden Knights make the simple and smart play. They move it to the middle, they move it to a player who is completely uncovered, and they score a goal. On the third one, this one being Alex Tuch's goal, it is Radim Shemek who ends up doing it, the puck watching. He is covering his man, and on the right side of the post, Vlasic is on the left side of the post, and the Golden Knights player is moving behind the net. The smart thing for Shemek to do is to let that player go around the net, let Vlasic deal with him on the other side, and then stay near that post, so that with Alex Tuch, who's still floating around around the face-off dot, you can get better coverage on him, as he is ended up being the eventual goal scorer of this one. But instead, Shemek follows that player around the net. He ends up getting mixed up with Vlasic. Vlasic realizes too late that Shemek has completely abandoned his post. He tries, you could see right before Tuch actually scored, you could see Vlasic realize that Tuch is completely uncovered and tries and gets to that side to give him some coverage, but instead the puck just comes straight to Tuch, who's all alone, and he scores. So Shemek on that one, Hertl on the first one. These are just plays that happen constantly from the San Jose Sharks, and that is a big reason why they are so often victimized on the defensive side of things, where there's just so many lazy plays that are being made from Sharks defensive players. It's not just Hurdle, it's not just Shemek, it's basically every single one. It feels as though almost half, if not more, of every Sharks goal can be completely identified by a single player who just completely gives up in terms of actual man-to-man coverage and just ends up following the puck watcher, and the Sharks end up with 2 or even 3 players following the puck holder and then multiple uncovered players on the ice. One of the reasons why the Golden Knights seemed like such an unstoppable team even just a couple of years ago when Gerard Gallant was their coach. I remember the 17-18 season and the 18-19 season is that the Golden Knights, they played this man-to-man coverage where it seemed as though whenever you would pass the puck to one of your other players, they would immediately be covered by a Golden Knights defender. And so it was so suffocating to play against because you couldn't really find the seams, you couldn't really find the open ice. It was extremely difficult to be able to get something past them. That was a team at the time that was so well oiled that they never really had these moments of puck watching, or is extremely rare. And the San Jose Sharks just, I don't know if it's a coaching thing or if it's a player issue, but it's something that happens way too often. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday. Will they take on the Minnesota Wild? As I said, they would have had a game on Friday, and that would have been their final one against the Golden Knights, but it had been delayed to the last game of the regular season, so we'll see if the Sharks can break out of their losing streak with that game against the Wild. Class dismissed.